Welcome to Shaka Movement's Malama Aina show. We are your hosts, Sam Small and Megan Powers. Joining us today will be Clifford Naeole and Dr. Romeo Quijano from the Philippines.
Clifford Naeole is a Hawaiian cultural consultant in the hotel industry. He's worked at high-level hotels for the past 23 years, bringing to the business establishment the Hawaiian mana, an understanding of the Hawaiian cultural practices, so that establishment can be an authentic venue for tourists, visitors coming to Hawaii to experience what Hawaii really is about. So he's got some things to say of how the current situation, Maui County becoming more and more identified with GMOs, more and more identified with pesticide exposure. Is that going to have an impact? What does that do to the tourist industry that is more and more and more becoming aware of things like organic and things like non-GMO? There's a study that just came out. It came out in March, I think. It's an analysis of research with individuals. The hotel industry pays for this kind of thing because they want to be able to target what are people looking for, what are our vacationers, who are our vacationers, and what are they looking for. And there's a segment of the population of visitors that are looking for the organic. They're looking for health and sustainability. It's a lifestyle of health and sustainability. They call it LOHAS. And these people characteristically have been for many years now interested in organic. That's their buzzword. And just this past year, those people fitting into that category, what triggers them to buy, what they're looking for is now specifically non-GMO. So they moved up the scale. They originally were looking for organic things, organic foods, organic experiences, and now they're looking for restaurant and food experiences that are specifically non-GMO. And to the extent that Maui County becomes identified with GMOs and with pesticides, these people are going to avoid us. I've already heard stories. We have people in our community that are from Vancouver, Canada. And they have, a healthy lifestyle. The West Coast is very heavily populated with people that are in this category. They are interested in a healthy and sustainable lifestyle, and they make their spending decisions, they make their purchasing decisions based on this stuff. Well, we hear that there's a whole slew of people from the Vancouver community that are not coming back to Maui. They used to come to Maui for vacationing, and because of all of the talk about pesticides and GMOs, they're not coming back to Maui. And it's not just talk. We're talking about it. We're not just making this stuff up. We're talking about it because the companies are doing it. They are expanding their fields. They are increasing the amount of pesticides that they spray. They just got the EPA to raise the level of exposure to Roundup that is allowable in your blood system, in your environment. The government now says, and believe me, the government doesn't do any tests. They have a disclaimer when they changed this regulation to say that we're not doing any tests. We are exclusively relying on the reports and studies generated by the chemical manufacturers that this stuff is safe, that they are telling the truth. Well, these are not companies that have a great history in telling the truth. And it is our firm belief that they are lying to us. It is our firm belief that they are manipulating the system. The system has been designed with loopholes built into the system, and they are doing every dirty deed that they can think of to keep their stranglehold and to keep what they think is the right way to do business. And it is not the Hawaiian way to do business. It is not the Hawaiian agriculture. It has nothing to do with Malama the Aina. That's about that. We have, please, the shakamovement.org website has a link to our brand new crowdfunding campaign. We are we're a not-for-profit organization. We are totally grassroots. All of the donations that we've received so far have come specifically from Maui County. Residents, actual residents, people who actually live here, have donated to Shaka to help us get this far. We're now opening the doors to other people now that we're on the ballot, now that the county council refused to do their job and protect you, the people that they're supposed to protect. They know something's going on that's wrong, and they refused to do anything about it because they didn't want to suffer the political consequences, of the corporations. We have to ensure that they suffer the political consequences of the people. So, if there are elected representatives that are not doing their job in representing you, they're representing corporations, and it's our job to vote those people out of office. We can't talk about them specifically because the Shaka movement is a not-for-profit organization, but there are other organizations that you can go online and look up this stuff, and you will find plenty of community-based organizations that are offering voter information for you for the elections. Do your job. We will present as much information as we can to help the public make an informed decision in November, information that is not filtered through any corporate interest, whether that's the organic industry or whether that's the genetically modified industry. We're not dealing with corporations. We're dealing with what the independent science that's out there. Most of it comes from outside the United States because the United States is so heavily manipulated by the corporations. Stay tuned. There's a lot coming your way.
I just, as you were sharing, I was recalling being in the county council chambers when we were giving testimony, and a lot of Monsanto's employees were there defending their jobs and giving testimony that they were given by Monsanto. And one of the things that someone had commented on was, how come these haoles from the mainland come and they live here for a year or two, and then they think they can tell us what to do, and it's like when you live in a place, you can accommodate to it and you get used to the status quo, and then when you come from somewhere else, you realize what an incredible gem on planet Earth that Maui is, that Maui County is.
Oh, yeah.
And you see in your travels, other places that were as beautiful as Maui that have been destroyed. And you're like, no, we can't let Maui get destroyed. And so, they've moved here a few years ago, and they got active, and they're protecting the Aina. Well, there's a lot of people who've lived here I've lived here for 44 years. I'm here protecting the Aina as well, with some time under my belt. But it's important not to invalidate the perspective from somebody who comes and they have a fresh view, and they realize, oh my gosh, Maui is such a precious place. We have to protect it.
We do. Also on our show today will be Dr. Romeo Quijano. And Dr. Quijano is a doctor from the Philippines. He is a pharmacology and toxicology professor, and has some incredible stories to tell you of the industrial and corporate abuse that has taken place and is taking place in the Philippines. We hope that that's near and dear to the hearts of our Filipino community here on Maui, to help you understand that these things go on in the Philippines. They also go on here. And so Dr. Quijano's story is particularly important, we think, for you to hear. And we'll tell you a little bit more about that in a little bit. So we're going to bring Clifford Naeole in. Thank you for joining us today on the Shaka Movement's Malama Aina show. We'll be right back.
All right, thank you. Welcome back to Shaka Movement's Malama Aina show. We have the pleasure this afternoon to have Clifford Naeole with us. He's been the cultural advisor to a very prestigious hotel for the last 23 years. Clifford, welcome.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Clifford, there's so much going on in our community. There are a lot of changes that seem to be happening, and one of the areas that may be affected is the hotel and guest industry. You've seen firsthand what people are looking for when they come to Maui. And if you would talk a little bit about that, and then we can talk about how some of that may be changing.
Absolutely. Of course, the traveler from around the world comes to Hawaii and they envision this beautiful paradise, etc. And most of our audience coming from North America comes from the West Coast, etc. Mm-hmm. And what we've been finding, as far as the trend that I see when I get to entertain media and some VIPs, etc., is they've already trained their mind to start looking for something of purity. They've already educated themselves before they get here, and they're looking for fresh fish. They're looking for fresh vegetables. They're looking for absolutely the best. Mm. So what happens is of course, as soon as they sit down, we already have their dietary restraints. In other words, I don't want gluten, I don't want a GMO, I don't want this. So we're having to adjust to make sure that what the client wants is readily available here on the island.
Right.
Uh-huh.
So this, in effect, I believe, is helping the farm-to-table movement for restaurants. And this is not only for the tourist industry, but for the overall health of our population as well.
Right.
So by the time they get here, they're already looking for these wonderful experiences. And to see on the menu, farm to table, see the table, already their minds are, oh, this is something that I can really enjoy. Right. So I do see a trend of more and more people coming here and being affected, their decisions being affected by the fact that, well, I'm going to check this restaurant out because it has this, rather than that. Right. Not saying that one tastes better over the other. Right. It's the internal suggestion that they have that we may make their decision for them.
Right. Uh-huh. There's, we pulled off of the web a research study on the sector of the marketplace called LOHAS. These are people that are lifestyle.
Here we go.
Thank you. Yeah, that one's got it. Lifestyle of health and sustainability. It's a particular segment of the marketplace when marketing people study why people spend and why people, make the consumer choices that they make. They survey people and they find these things out. What are people looking for? And just as you say, Clifford, people have been looking for organic. That's been their buzzword for a while. And one of the changes that has taken place this year for the first time is that the target, that what people are looking for, is specifically non-GMO.
And the non-GMO now is more important than organic. Not that it's more important, but that is what the more consumers care about. In fact, it's 80% to 56%.
Yeah. So it is a heightened sensitivity to these issues that we're dealing with here. It's none of this is happening in a vacuum.
Correct.
All of these things affect each other, and a lot of it affects us who live here in Maui County as well, on many, many, many different levels.
It's one of the things we brag about when we go on the road to visit different organizations, media, especially in the mainland, be it the East Coast or the West Coast, and it's to brag about just how great our food is and our farms, etc. And that generates stories. The stories go to the readers. The readers educate themselves. They spread the word of mouth, and then they make their decision upon that. Right. Not just because of the Mai Tais and the sunburn and everything else. The whole menu of ingredients and spices and everything else that Maui has to offer, it does help them to make the decision to come here. Yeah. Where to dine, where not to dine, where to take their children. And that's important because that has happened to me many times where I see families will say to their children, okay, let's order this because of that. So it is spreading in a sense as the education grows and grows and grows.
Yeah.
And I think, as I always say, they're choosing to err on the safe side than on the wrong side. Mm-hmm. And so by that, they just want to make sure for the future, because right now, as we say in the navigators, you know where you went, therefore you know where you're going. Mm-hmm. We don't know where we went yet with this. So therefore we can't really see what's coming up. So we know traditional growing methods, organic growing methods are pure and safe. These methods may not. They may be proven false afterwards, later on, I don't know. But right now, we know what is guaranteed, and that is the protection of the seeds. The unguaranteed part, of course, is the pesticides and everything else that's coming through.
Yeah. And it is a dual issue in terms of the safety question.
Correct.
There's a whole debate over, the sciences, the science, when you start getting into DNA and horizontal transfer, and, these are very technical things, and they're very scientific, and there's science on both sides of them. And not all the science agrees. And some of the science is funded by corporations, and some of the science is more independent. And we try and bring the independent science to the public through the Shaka movement.org website, and provide as much information that is not manipulated by any corporate entity at all.
I've been noticing that nearly every magazine I pick up, Menu Magazine, Mana Magazine, Hanaho, Edible, they're all talking about farm to table, they're all talking about organic, they're all talking about health and educating your children about your food choices and how those affect the health of your body. And so, if we just follow the money, where the money is right now is farm to table. Where the money is organic. That's the and non-GMO. Now we know non-GMO is even a faster growing sector than organic. But for years, organic has been the fastest growing food sector, yep. and now that's being kind of outpaced by non-GMO. People, need to be educated that organic means non-GMO. But it's interesting. You can have something that's not organic, that does have pesticides on it, but it isn't GMO.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
And for a lot of people, that's the most important thing. Mm-hmm. You know what? There's pesticides on my hamburger buns. They've always been that way. But I don't want my hamburger buns to be GMO.
Correct.
And the opposite, that's actually where I was headed before. The opposite is also true, because the GMO issue is that technical science thing, and it's kind of hard to prove. Certainly, there's a lot of debate on it. Mm-hmm. But what there is no debate over is that pesticides kill things.
Yeah.
Herbicides kill things. Fungicides kill things. That's what they do. Yeah. And that's not, you don't need to be a scientist to understand that. That's these chemicals are applied because they kill things. And so how much killing can this Aina withstand before they spray the stuff in the fields and it spreads out. It doesn't stay in the fields. We know there's pesticide drift when they spray it. We know that there's fugitive dust. We know that we have runoff that turns the ocean into a cesspool of chemicals. I mean, what a chemical cocktail mix. The stuff that runs off of those fields after heavy rains down into the ocean, killing the reefs. I'm still looking for verification of it, but I heard told that one of the surfing organizations had their annual meeting among the participants and stuff, where they were trying to decide where it is that we're going to hold this meet, mm-hmm. this contest this year, and everybody said, we're not going to Maui. We don't want to be in that water because we've experienced that brown runoff and we don't know what pesticides and what chemicals we're being exposed to. We're not going to have any part of it.
Right. Wow. If you imagine a perfect forest, let's say the Garden of Eden, so many intricate pieces to the puzzle, all depending on each other for survival. Yeah. And a new species comes in from out of nowhere. It affects the first piece of that puzzle. From here on in, everything trickles down, and then things just start to go awry. It starts to crack, and that fragile structure all of a sudden is it's fractured to the point where we don't know where to fix it anymore. Yeah. And this is something that I'm afraid of course. We all live in a beautiful spot here in Hawaii, and brown water runoff, etc., is one instance. I have many family members on Molokai who are traditional farmers, and they may use pesticides on their thing. They're just working hard to make a living, etc. But I will stand by the fact that I will err on the safe side. Not one mistake can be made on a piece of the puzzle, because if it does happen, and if it does become something that's totally outrageous, we'll be the next people who are taken someplace else to live, because this land will be unlivable. Much like how, for instance, in the South Seas, where we bombed an island so many times that they all had to move the population someplace else. Right. I don't want us to be caught in that. And this may be just some crazy thinking of myself.
There are people who have plenty of credentials, who scientists who firmly believe that the risk is very, very real. That the combinations of pesticides and chemicals that they spray in the field are completely underregulated. Even in the county council testimony that took place on Maui over the past month, they had experts from the Environmental Protection Agency on the phone testifying and trying to clarify, and the question came up about this combination of stuff, and their basic position, their regulatory system is such that they call it tanking. If you tank up chemicals for spraying in a tank, then you report what goes into that tank.
Yes.
If you tank up a separate tank, then that gets reported separately. You are free to spray them at the same time or one after another, but nobody knows if you did that.
I see.
And that's where we have an objection to the agreement that Maui County made with the agrochemical industry on their voluntary reporting, because what they volunteered to report was at the end of the year, they'll give a list of what chemicals they sprayed and how much they sprayed them.
I see.
And that's the end of the list. They're not going to say where they sprayed the chemicals, and they're not going to say when they sprayed the chemicals. So
or
they
which
can
combinations,
well,
or in which combinations.
There is no, or in what combinations. To them it's all good, because they can have one tank of this chemical and they can have one tank of that chemical, and they can just spray them right after each other, and nobody knows about it. And we're dealing with chemicals that are like the basic chemical that's in Agent Orange. They're not allowed to spray them, along with each other, because they know that it's a problem. But under the current regulatory system, there's nothing to stop them from tanking them separately and yet spraying them at the same time. And the EPA even admitted it.
Correct. And of course, the location is all important. If it's next to schools or traffic or any residential area, of course, the drift, it's another piece of that puzzle that gets affected. Yes.
And the companies don't even seem to, be human. That on Kauai, they wanted buffer zones. Please just spray. Tell us what you're spraying. Okay, that would be nice. But even still, just create a buffer zone so that you're not spraying right up against our schools. And the companies refuse.
Yeah. What?
What is up with that? I mean, you want to be. They say that they're, that they have a big heart, and that these companies are doing these things because they want to feed the world. But yet they trash the local community that they're in. That's not Pono.
Not at all. For those that are affected, not at all, and for those who are doing it, not at all. The buffer zone should be quite the the median between everything. That should have settled it all. Okay, you do your thing. Just make sure we're safe on this side.
Right.
If you cannot, and it affects this side, then you're intruding on my space.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't want that. So a buffer zone would have been the great mitigation. Everything would have been, at least a start at that point in time. Correct, at that point.
Yeah.
So I hope that through discussion and some sane minds as we move along with this, and people start listening and more education from the mainland and from here on both sides. Because like I said, I have friends on both sides of the street here doing this. And as I profess not to be an expert on this, I just profess to say that I have my own health problems. I worry about the future for my kids, etc. And I'm just trying to be as guaranteed as possible. Yeah, I'm trying.
Well, not to be doom and gloom, but I think there is a risk to the tourist economy. As it's to me, it's one of the unfortunate things that the county council didn't take action to move this thing along more quickly, because the only thing that anybody's going to be talking about between now and November about Maui is GMOs and pesticides, because it's going to be a big contest. The companies are coming in. We already know that they're coming in. They're coming in with all kinds of disruptive techniques. We know that they're doing media. I'm a media guy. I got a call from a PR agency in California that they wanted to hire me to help them tell Monsanto's story, and I told them I couldn't take the job, because I'm here and because I know better. I know that their story. I know how to tell stories in film and television, and I tell stories that are honest, and I know how they use the same medium and the same skills to tell stories that are dishonest. It happens all the time. And it's going to be happening here on Maui, folks. They're in production now. Many of you have received requests and inquiries to participate in focus group sessions. Well, what they're focus grouping is, what are your objections? What stories are most effective if they tell you this story, if they make up a story and tell it to you? What are you willing to believe to be able to feel comfortable about the situation? And they're manufacturing a documentary, a little movie, and they're going to be everywhere. You're going to see them everywhere. Leading up to the November election. And our county council had an opportunity to avoid that. They had an opportunity to avoid Maui County being trashed by the media. And it's not a presidential election coming up. So the media is going to be desperate for stories. The more these companies spend in this market, the bigger the story is going to be, the more global interest there's going to be in the Maui GMO pesticide story. That's the last thing our tourist industry needs. That's going to become a devastating factor in our community, much more so, I think, than the jobs that would get shifted around in the ag sector. They didn't even commit. The companies never actually said, we will fire people. They never said that. They never said, we will not, that if we can't grow GMO, we're not going to grow anything. They never said that, but they're very successful in giving that impression. And the council people responded to that impression that everything would be lost if this moratorium goes through. And it's just not true, people. It's just not true.
I think it will go on. It has to go on with all the fallow fields that we have now, with all the opportunity for us to turn into an agricultural community. This whole island basically has so much fallow lands that we could turn into something great.
Yes.
I would love it to be something that's sustainable. We should be already the poster child for solar energy, wind, wave energy, etc., and also for natural farming. In the days of old, we were 100% self-sustainable.
Sure.
And all the pieces of the puzzle fit.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now we're 90% dependent.
Yep.
So things have gone over to the other side, per se.
Well, what was Molokai like before they started monocropping? Before the seed companies came in and took over and started their intensive commercial agriculture?
Well, Molokai is truly a great island that thinks village. A lot of them, of course, employment is an issue, but they sustain themselves by hunting, fishing, and farming, and they're happy people. They live by this. They're great, and they depend upon each other. It was always an island that took care of its own.
Right.
And I admire them for that. I really do admire Molokai for that. I cannot say exactly how quickly all of this impacted them. I do know that they are dependent upon it at this time, because that's a stranglehold almost that these things may have.
Right.
And like I said, my family are great farmers, and they share with the community what they have. So it's always a giving thing. But I agree with you that it won't end because of GMO labeling. It won't end because of pesticide control. We'll move on. We'll get better things from this. It has to, because if that's the way science works, that's the way science will go. But if we leave it as it is, where science becomes a strain that just follows itself, and we trail behind, I don't know where we're going.
Yeah.
I don't know. You know, I was just a quick personal story. I was having dinner with a guest, and he heard of my challenges. And he says to me, "If I could change your life, would you change it?" I said, "Absolutely." So he sends me to take it to Arizona to a health clinic. So I go up there to a naturopathic clinic, and every day he took me and he showed me these films and the statistics about these things here, and it blew my mind. I never even knew what was happening on this island, but it took someone from Arizona to show me what was happening on this island. And I came back and went, wow. And so from that point on, I started looking at labels more, etc., and choosing a little bit more wisely. And yes, I'm a local boy. Sometimes I got to break down, I got to have my spam, and I got to do all this stuff. You know how that is. But at the same time, at least I am aware more of what's going on. But it took someone else from afar who came to our hotel and says, "If I could change your life, would you do it?" And he took me away, and he educated me a bit about it.
Well,
Yeah,
it's interesting. There's a preponderance of diabetes in the Hawaiian community.
Absolutely.
And there are some studies to suggest that some of these digestive and blood sugar problems are related to, it's one of the big GMO questions, that it's disrupting the proper assimilation of nutrients into the body. And diabetes is one of the results. Obesity is the same thing, that we're not absorbing our nutrients properly because of the chemicals that are in our food chain.
So if we look at ourselves as the perfect seed, and we keep injecting something into this perfect seed, we're the one that the seed withers in the end, instead of keeping it as a perfect seed. We were born as the perfect seed. But now, as things are brought into our bodies, we are the ones that are destroying ourselves, basically, without knowledge sometimes, But like I said, there is definitely a trend of people coming here and saying, "I want something that I can be absolutely assured that this is good for me." And with our wonderful chefs and everything else that we have on this island, bingo, they've got it.
It can be.
Absolutely.
I really relate with what you're saying. Having grown up here and just really close to nature myself, and living sustainably as a young child up until just a few years ago, out in the country, that being that uncontaminated seed is not only our bodies when we're born, and it's affected by what we ingest through our lifetime, but it's the same with the Aina. And I know, as you're native Hawaiian. I'm not native Hawaiian, but I feel like it because I feel the Aina, and I feel like I feel the poisoning that's happening to it, and it really breaks my heart. And what you shared earlier about your concern about the delicate web of life in the forest, and the delicate web of life that is here, that is so uniquely Hawaiian, and that's why visitors come here, is because to experience paradise in this unique environment. And we know that none of the plants had defense mechanisms.
No.
The animals, they didn't have defense mechanisms, the indigenous ones, because they didn't need them. And to me, it's like that. Those plants that didn't have defenses is like the same as aloha in our hearts, and is the way that we can share with our community, and so. It's like I feel it in my body when I know that the Aina is being poisoned, and there's these rips happening in the web of life here in paradise, and that's why I'm here on the show. That's why I'm here, and and for my great grandchildren, I just, I don't want them to look at me and say, oh my God, you didn't take action and protect the Aina from being poisoned when you could. And we've already had so many abuses with all these invasive species of plants and insects, and it's like
and plantation
and there's already been so many chemicals sprayed. And a living system can only take so much before it starts to break down.
Yeah.
And it's like you and I have health challenges, and it's like we were really strong for a really long time, and then finally it was too much and something broke down, and couldn't fight it anymore. And so it's like when I look at the island of Maui and Maui Nui, Molokai and Lanai, it's like we need to take care. Malama the Aina. The Aina is our life force into the future, and so anyway, my conclusion there.
Beautifully said. Thank you.
We can only take so much abuse, and that's why we're here, is to stop the pesticides and to stop these other invasive organisms, these GMOs, from getting out into an already very delicate and very precious ecosystem that needs to be cared for.
Correct. If you look at, just take pharmaceutical pills.
Yeah.
I take one pill for one thing, there's a counter effect. There's a side effect. So you have to take another to correct that side effect, take another to correct that side effect.
Yeah.
So it becomes a chain.
It does.
And before you know it, you start with one, but you've got 10 because of all these other things that are going on.
Yep.
It's a huge trickle-down effect.
Yep.
Yeah.
So let's hope that we have sense enough to stop it at a point where we don't have to take something else and spray it because this is not working anymore, and then spray that because that one's not working anymore. And before you know it, we don't know what we have.
You don't know what it's.
Exactly.
It's a soup. It's a toxic soup.
Yeah.
And that is exactly the agricultural model that is being proliferated across the world because of Monsanto and the other biotech ag companies. We create a plant that's resistant to Roundup or to our pesticide of the day, and you get these non-lethal doses around the edges of the field. Well, that allows those plants to develop resistance.
Desensitized.
And so they become super weeds. And so then those super weeds invade your fields. So exactly what you said. Then we come up with a new, more toxic pesticide or herbicide to spray on the fields. Oh yeah, that is going on my food. That the first one went on my food, and now the second one is going on my food. And that system is not sustainable. It definitely is for their pockets, for their profits.
They're a chemical company.
So selling more chemicals is sustainable and profitable for them.
Right.
But it's not for life on Earth.
Right.
Life on Earth cannot sustain continually being hosed down with poisons. And so people out there in the world, we have our little fight here on Maui, but Monsanto is doing damage worldwide, and we know you're out there, and we know you support us in fighting this fight. And I don't know.
No, it's perfect.
I didn't want to bring that into your presentation.
And let me briefly, Clifford, forgive me, but it's an opportunity to speak that the Shaka movement does have a brand new crowdfunding campaign, and you can get to it. Go to theshakamovement.org. And you can see it's with Indiegogo. So if you go to Indiegogo, you can search for Shaka Movement and you'll find us there. And it's an opportunity for people around the world to participate in what's going on here on Maui, because what's going on in Maui County does affect the entire world. 80%, at least, maybe even more, of the BT corn seed, that's the poison corn. It's not for human consumption. It's made for corn oil that's used into biodiesel and other fuels, and it's fed to animals, but it's not for human consumption. Unfortunately, the pollen drifts. The workers, get
the birds.
It rubs off. The seeds get handled. The birds move it around. The dust, everything. Humans do end up consuming this stuff, but it's never been tested on humans because, quote unquote, it's not for human consumption. It's one of those little, holes a loophole that they built intentionally into the regulatory system so that these agrochemical companies could do what it is that they're doing. And they're doing it very successfully. They want to grow. They're buying more property here in Maui County. They want to expand their operations here in Maui County. That means more pesticides are going to be sprayed on the fields. We get pesticide spray in Maui County 4 times a year. On the mainland, they get 1 crop, maybe if they're lucky 2 crops, depending on the season. We got beautiful weather here. They have 4 growing cycles a year here in Maui County. That means we're getting 4 times the amount of pesticides that other humans are exposed to only because we live in paradise. That's not fair. And the pesticide load that they do, they're manufacturing commercial-based seeds. These seeds go out into the world. It's a commercial product, so it needs to be standardized. They want, their best practices so that they get the best quality control possible. Well, what is it that reduces the quality of a plant, of a seed? It's something that stresses that plant. Whether that's a bug, whether that's a bacteria, whether that's a fungus, whatever it is that is going to stress that plant. Well, their job is to remove all of those stress factors from those plants, and they do that by spraying every chemical, every kind of chemical that you can think of. A fungicide, a herbicide, a bactericide, antibiotics. Roundup is an antibiotic. I don't know if people don't know that. Roundup was originally patented as an antibiotic because it is an endocrine system disruptor, and it kills its target because it destroys it functions internally.
And I just have to say, having in the midst of a breast cancer fight right now, that endocrine cancers are the most prevalent and growing cancers in America. And America is the one who, for the last 15 years, we've been the test animals for GMO food. And how interesting that all of our endocrine cancers, that's breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, prostate cancer, thyroid cancer, those are the cancers that have been increasing. How interestingly, at kind of about the same rate that the increase of GMO food has come onto the market.
Yep.
That same learning curve?
It's the same.
Yeah, same curve.
And they say, the companies say, well, that's correlation. Correlation doesn't prove causation. But when you take the accumulated effect that all of these different, especially the endocrine system dysfunctions, all of them, just track the same trend line. At some point, you got to give over to the fact that there is a connection. And that's why, the scientists say, no, and some scientists say yes. Well, none of that is based on any studies that were actually done here in Maui County. Mm-hmm. They did those studies in their laboratories. They did those studies in Washington, D.C. They did those studies, under very controlled, very precise circumstances to fit into that fractured regulatory structure with built-in loopholes that lets them do what it is that they do. They designed the system. And none of what their science claims about safety has anything to do with what's actually going on in the fields here in Maui County. And that's what the moratorium is designed to do. It is designed to take a break. Let's just stop for the time being spraying the pesticides. Let's just stop for the time being doing their open field experiments. and let's run some tests specific to the farming practices that are being practiced in our fields. We're exposed to the stuff by the fugitive dust, we're exposed to the stuff by the runoff water and pesticide drift, and we want to know what's happening to us. What are these companies? They don't live here. You know, I mean, the people who testified at the county council, well, you know, they live here. You know, they were the Maui, president of Monsanto. But the president of Monsanto didn't come here. You know, they don't live in this environment, and they're willing to trash this environment. In our crowdfunding video, we have a beautiful brother who speaks in Hawaiian, and you know, he talks about how the company just their form of farming just doesn't respect the Hawaiian way. You know, cultures that are connected to the soil and to the earth have a respect for everything that's in the earth and everything that's in the soil. You know, farming techniques, traditional farming techniques have a respect. The Korean natural farming, which is very similar in a lot of ways to Hawaiian practices, is so much based on the soil fungus. That white stuff, you know, if you pick up the soil, if you pick up some leaves or stuff in the field, and there's this fibrous white stuff that you know is around. Well, that stuff has a direct symbiotic relationship with the plant. 80% of every plant in existence has a symbiotic relationship with some form of fungus.
Correct.
And symbiotic is that they take care of each other. I scratch your back, you scratch my back.
I've seen that happen at the hotel that I work at. We started our own organic farm. Beautifully done, where all of our wastes go to our compost heap. And we have a volunteer, and he comes, and he started from nothing. And he created that type of growing where this plant will take care of this plant, which will take care of this plant. Instead of this side effect, will take care of this side effect, will take care of this side effect. So he's got wonderful fruits and vegetables, even a butterfly garden. I mean, it's so beautiful to see these plants growing together. And they're all dependent upon each other for their survival, which is great, but it's not, he never uses pesticides at all. Not at all.
It can be done.
But this plant gives off a certain aroma, per se, for lack of better words, that protects the plant next to it.
Sure.
And they just take care of each other. And it's wonderful to see our chefs in their grand whites in the garden, picking the herbs and spices and the tomatoes and basil and everything else. And it feels, he had inspired me to grow something. You know, this guy is great. And when our guests go on their tour, we call it a Green Harvest Tour. And guests go on the tour, and then our chefs will take a smoothie from the garden, a green smoothie, and create it for them at the end of their tour. And they're just, they're smiling. They say, wow, how beautiful is this? You know, instead of miles and miles and miles of big old machines that going and doing all this stuff, here's a person who takes care of it, and it's a pretty big piece of property. But it's a wonderful thing to see, is all these things growing together. It's like being in one canoe. Everybody's dependent upon each other. You know, it's a grand thing.
Well, that really is. I mean, those are the principles of permaculture, where you're companion planting and where your plants take care of one another and help their immune systems to be stronger. And the soil food web that you're talking about with the mycorrhizae and the other microorganisms, there's a whole complex soil food web. That those are probiotics. And they're for the plant, and they're also for us. And you know, there's been this big boom of probiotics on the market, and eat your yogurt and eat your eat your kefir and eat your sauerkraut, and it's because the food that we've been eating lately has become sterilized, and we're not getting the probiotics that we normally would get from nature. That we would get because there was a little bit of soil left on our lettuce or something. I'm not saying don't wash your lettuce, but hey, you know, when you have a healthy soil food web that your food and that your plants grow in, that's also healthy soil inside your belly that gives you the strength and vitality and supports your immune system. I have to acknowledge the mana'o that you shared with us about the Hawaiian perspective of, you know, when we know where we are, we know where we're going. But like you said, like the jury's not out yet on the GMO. And so we don't really know where we are. And so it's hard to get footing on where we're going. And so kind of exercising the precautionary principle of, hey, let's just check this out and, you know, make sure that we're not doing some irreversible damage before we go any
Correct.
further. And that's really, you know, the impetus for this initiative.
It's just coming to a ceasefire, a truce, and say,
Yeah.
okay, guys, let's regroup here. I say yes, you say no. That means one of us is wrong. Or we both may be wrong.
Right.
But whatever the case may be, let's make sure we're both correct.
Right.
So that truce of GMO and pesticide and labeling, etc., along with the traditional farmers and their procedures, and coming together just again to make sure we know where we're going. It's a simple fact. You know,
Yeah.
just plan ahead.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be a guinea pig. I don't want to be a guinea pig.
No one deserves that. No one agreed to that.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening. You know, you talk about how they sterilize the soil. Well, as a scientist who spent a lot of time in a laboratory, you know, a petri plate is you put agar on a plate and you sterilize it, and then you can inoculate it with whichever organism you're researching. And so they're basically sterilizing the soil so that they can grow their organism. But, you know, what does that mean down the line? There's no soil food web, and you can't sustain life. And the other thing is that we're in that petri plate. You and me and the visitors and the kids and the old folks, everybody, the animals, the soil microorganisms, we're all in that petri plate.
And whatever flows downhill into the ocean as well.
Yeah, and
the reefs too.
we didn't sign up for this, and we didn't agree to it.
Well, you know, it's just there's just this arrogance that's attached to it that they think that they have the right to do this. You know, that just because they've established this method of doing business and this method of chemical agriculture, that they have a right to do that more than I have a right to live my life.
Well, they've sort of been granted the patent of life, unfortunately, by
That
our
was a huge mistake.
by our United States government.
Yeah.
That's the hard part.
Yeah.
Is how do we take that back now?
I know.
So.
Well, and these are issues that dovetail with Citizens United, where the corporations have now an unlimited ability to contribute money to political campaigns.
And we're seeing, well, I won't mention it.
It's, you know, it's insanity. It's absolute insanity. And more and more people are becoming sensitized to it. More and more people are becoming aware of it. You know, continue watching the Shaka movement, you know, website and our work, because we're, you know, we want to, you know, bring to the public as much information that's independent of these kind of corporate mechanisms as we possibly can. We need your help to do that. Go to our crowdfunding site, donate.
Share it, tweet it,
Yeah, all
post
the social
it, post
media,
it to
you know,
your
please,
social
it's
media.
brand new. We just launched it. We
Send
need you
it
to
to-
get in there and click on things and
Send it
make
to
it
all-
active.
All your friends on email.
Educate themselves.
So that we can, that's right. You know, we want to have public forums. We've had public forums. We've brought independent experts here to Maui. We just had a program where a doctor, a toxicologist from the Philippines came and spoke here on Maui, and we're going to play some of his stuff in this show. And there's a lot of independent information that is coming your way. We're going to do our best to counter the misinformation and propaganda that the corporations spread as part of their business structure. These people are just doing their jobs, and unfortunately they do their jobs very well. They obscure the truth, they obscure the facts, and they will mislead you. And they did it, you know, done it many times in many different places. This is the same company that brought you DDT. This is the same company that brought you PCBs. And they told everybody that those were safe, and they turned into absolute horrors. And we're committed to not letting that happen to Maui County.
Yeah.
And the state of Hawaii.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Because whatever starts here is going to affect the world.
right.
If we're considered ground zero, it spreads from here.
Yeah.
So, as I said, if we educate ourselves and educate others,
Yep.
and I think we can possibly find that stalemate, at least as the very beginning, just put everybody in check and then move forward from there. And we'll see what happens.
We still have an opportunity to deal with some of these things until the powers that be in Oahu in the legislature. Some of them are our own senators. Our own senators have voted for laws that would restrict the rights of the county specifically to regulate farming practices. We currently do have the right to regulate farming practices as they affect us as individuals because we live on the same ground. And there are legislatures, you need to vote them out of office. Take a look at some of the voting guides that are out there that can give you information. We can't. Our not-for-profit status doesn't allow us to advocate for any particular politician, but there are other groups out there, the Sierra Club and others. Go online, go on Facebook, and look for this information so that on Saturday there are people that have been voted into office that are not working for you. They are doing the business for the corporations, and they are not acting in good faith for the people that they supposedly represent. Please, please, please register to vote. And that's also a cultural thing with a lot of Hawaiians. They've avoided this, this whole thing. They just look at it and they can't believe that it's going on.
A lot of it has to do with frustration to the point where they've given up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And once they give up, we lose the voice, and
Right.
we lose more power.
Yep.
Yeah.
So to all of our Hawaiian people out there, I do urge you to register to vote. Take a look at things and think. Let's think backwards a little while. Take a great step backwards for mankind, and don't waste your DNA. You know how things should be. It's in you. It's there.
Mana.
So, yes, it's the mana, it's your genealogy. We got here because someone sat in a canoe and survived a seat, and their seat they were experts in something. So it's time for us to be experts again. Go out and find it. Don't waste your DNA. Educate yourselves, your family, so we can educate the world. And hopefully, sooner or later, these big corporations will understand that in reality, they're supposed to be working for us. They're not supposed to be working for themselves. Mm-hmm. And I may live in a utopian thought at that point in time.
Actually, unfortunately, the corporate law is such that they work for their shareholders. There have been many lawsuits where shareholders have taken the leaders of corporations to court because they tried to do something that was altruistic, and it cost the company money. It started with Henry Ford, and he wanted to reduce the price of cars so that more people would be able to afford cars. And the shareholders of the corporation sued him and forced him out of his own company because of how altruistic he wanted to be. Corporations are mandated by law to function to the benefit of their shareholders only.
I see.
So if you own shares in Monsanto, that's who's benefiting. Nobody else. If they say that they're feeding the world, they ain't.
Yeah.
They're not. It's just not true.
That's not true. There's all kinds of studies that have proven that farming GMO crops does not produce higher yields, does not bring more money to the farmer, and actually leaves the community with more damage done. And so it's been proven by people that are highly educated, that aren't just Shaka movement people, that
No, we're not making this stuff up.
Yeah, we're not making this stuff up. I just thank you so much, Clifford, for joining us.
My pleasure.
And what do you? I thank you for calling out the Hawaiian vote, because we need you. We need you to get involved and take care. And I know that a lot of my friends are also discouraged and frustrated, and they're like, well, I'm not registered to vote, and I don't vote for this, and it's like, hey, this is one of those experiences where it was people in the community saw something that needed to be changed, and it actually is going straight to the ballot so that the community gets to vote on it. It didn't get all watered down by and all bought off by, you know, people in the county council and here and there. It's like it's actually from the people to the ballot. This is that one time when you register and you show up and you vote, even if that's the only thing you vote on.
Even if it's just that one thing you vote on. You know, you may be so frustrated and you say, I don't give a rip. What does my vote count? It doesn't really count anyway. Well, this time the vote can really count. And even if it's for that one significant factor about this issue right here, it can make a huge difference. It can. So please, Maui, and for those of you who live here in the islands, this is a time to get out there and take a stance so that we can shape the future of Hawaii the way we want it to be and be self-sustainable in all facets, from energy to food to sea and grazing, etc. So, you know, hey, we want to be healthy. You want to live. You want to live in paradise.
Lucky us.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Luckily, we live Hawaii.
That's Sam just shared about these two doctors or researchers that came from the Philippines and had a presentation. And one of his main that I remember about Dr. Quijano. Yeah, he, you know, his definition of health not only had to do with physical health, but it was, you know, a healthy person has, you know, a healthy physical and spiritual and mental, emotional, and relationship to their environment.
Yes.
And you know, it really, that was a part of the whole definition. I think it actually came from the World Health Organization or something that actually acknowledged environment as being integral to our well-being. Our well-being.
Yep.
And this is an example where we're going, hey, those pesticides aren't good for our well-being nor all the other life here on the Aina.
Well, and in Hawaii, you know, that's what's natural to Hawaiian culture and understanding. I mean, the state motto, you know, there's an official translation about righteousness, but
right.
that the translation that I've heard that sounds so much more real and accurate is that life is perpetuated through a balanced relationship with the land.
Yes.
Aina.
So, how I look at it, it just says is if the place flourishes, so will mankind.
Yeah.
And on the opposite side of that, if we choose to destroy that place, then we destroy ourselves. It's plain and simple. You know, very, very simple. Yeah. So hopefully we will understand that motto and get things moving and make sure that Hawaii is a much better place.
Great. Well, Clifford, thank you for your time here.
It's been an honor. Thank you
so much for your time and energies and your wisdom and for speaking from your heart to this community.
I try my best. I did say in that earlier that I saw a quote that said, because man has succeeded in injecting a cell or a gene into a seed, it doesn't mean you created life. It just means you polluted it.
You polluted it.
So I'll keep that in my heart.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will be back with more of the Shaka Movement's Malama Aina show in just a moment.
Yeah.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Welcome back to the Shaka Movement's Malama Aina show. I'm Sam Small. This is my lovely co-host, Megan Powers. Thank you so much for helping and being a part of this show. It's wonderful.
Absolutely.
We have also for you today some recorded material from a presentation made recently here on Maui by Dr. Romeo Quijano. Dr. Quijano is a professor of pharmacology and toxicology in the Philippines. And he has a message for the Filipino community here on Maui. And he also, specific to our current political and specific to the moratorium and how the Filipino community here on Maui, in Maui County, is exposed to industrial and chemical pollutants through the farming practices, and how, through his experience, the companies that are responsible for this are not honest and are distruthful to it. One of the gems of his talk was an explanation that in the Philippines, that pesticides are described as plant medicine. So if your plant has bugs, if your plant has a fungus, you give it plant medicine. Unfortunately, those are actually pesticides, and they're designed to kill. And if you're not careful, they're going to kill you. So let us bring Dr. Quijano in, and we'll be back in a little while. Thanks.
Nabalitaan ko po na mayroong moratorium para itigil ang pagtatanim ng GMOs, at sana po ay suportahan ninyo ang moratorium na ito sapagkat sa tingin ko po ay delikado sa ating kalusugan at kapaligiran ang ganitong mga GMOs, at palagay ko po naman ang mga komunidad ay may kakayahan para makakuha ng mga alternatibong pamamaraan at trabaho para hindi naman mawala ang kanilang kabuhayan. Well, I encourage the people to really support the moratorium on the growing of GMOs because this is for the future of the children and for our own health. And if we are worried about jobs, I think people themselves can do something about it for alternative jobs that is more sustainable and that is more protective of health and environment.
Really very honored to be introduced by Dr. Pang. I've been hearing many things good about you, so I'm really excited to be here. And to my countrymates, former countrymates, Kailian, Kakabsat, na imbaga Malama Quijano amin na po. I come also from the northern part of the Philippines, so I feel, in fact, I have a lot of relatives here in Hawaii, but I just don't know where they are. So I hope I find some of them. And I'm tasked to talk about poisons, health, and environment. And I'll probably focus more on the pesticides and also discuss GE crops as requested of me. But before that, I'd like to discuss the more general things about health and environment. I hope you agree with me that this is a definition of what good health is. In fact, even the World Health Organization actually agrees with the general definition of what good health is, except that they don't include a spiritual component and they don't mention anything about the environment. But in this definition, I think it's more appropriate in terms of, especially if you are talking about rural communities. So good health is not only the absence of disease, but the state of complete physical, mental, spiritual, and social well-being in harmony with the environment. Well, now many doctors actually will agree with this, except for the spiritual. Many doctors will also agree on the environmental aspect, but the actual practice is quite different. We are still stuck with that concept that when you talk about a disease, you talk about a single cause. In fact, when you talk about a treatment, you talk about a single chemical that would address a certain disease, which is actually not really, if you look at the holistic, from the holistic point of view, it's not really logical. And to me, there's no disease that is caused just by a single factor. And therefore, it's so very difficult to make a one-to-one association between one causative factor and the result, one illness. So again, this is a very complex thing. That's why it's very important that when we are suspecting a certain chemical that is causing a certain disease, we should always be conscious about the other factors that might be contributing to it, and we should also document those things. And therefore, our contention that this chemical is largely responsible to the disease will be strengthened if we actually pay attention also to the other possible confounding factors. I find that in many studies about causation of exposure to chemicals and certain illnesses, they hardly make mention of the potential confounding factors. So that weakens the argument that this chemical is causing this disease. So in the communities that we work, we emphasize that the communities themselves can actually document all these factors and make their own analysis to what extent this factor is contributing to the production of, to the causation of the disease. It's not necessary to make 100% one-to-one correspondence. Next, please. And just like to emphasize that on the issue of pesticides, there's no place in the world that is actually not contaminated by pesticides. In the United Nations meetings that we have attended, especially when I was the co-chair of the International PUPS Elimination Network, the Inuit Indians near the North Pole have always complained about the fact that they are being poisoned and yet they are not using pesticides. because most of the pesticides we apply in other parts of the world are actually accumulating more in their areas. So the Inuit Indians, I believe we call them also Eskimos, have the highest concentration of DDT in breast milk. And they've always appealed for action from the international community. And it was only recently that the international community took action through the Stockholm Convention, which Gilbert mentioned, which identified certain persistent pollutants to be banned globally. And there are a few of them, and there are many more that needs to be banned. But nevertheless, at least there's some action regarding these persistent pollutants. And probably most farmers or those who are applying pesticides in other countries, they probably don't realize that when they spray these persistent pollutants like DDT, endosulfan, chlordane, etc., it goes to the northern hemisphere and concentrate on the colder parts of the globe. And within 1 month, actually, you can find already some evidence that it has reached the colder parts of the globe in the northern hemisphere. And they don't need a visa to enter Canada, actually, because they go through the atmospheric currents and through the water, and of course through the food that is being imported by the countries in the north. So I think it's a global responsibility by all peoples of the world to be aware of this and be conscious of the responsibility not to poison our brothers and sisters, the Inuit Indians and some other communities in the north. And that's the reason why the northern countries like the US, Canada, and the European countries paid attention to this treaty, because they started to realize that the pesticides that they are selling in the developing countries like the Philippines are actually going back to them, poisoning them also. So that's probably the reason why we also were successful to get these countries to agree at least to this kind of international treaty. And as Gilbert mentioned, we were able to ban also endosulfan using the provisions of that treaty. And we hope that we could add some more. And there's now a big movement in Canada and the US to also include other persistent pollutants, like for example, your flame retardants. I don't know if this is a big issue in Hawaii, but in Canada, in mainland, it's a big issue of the toxicity that you get from the polybrominated flame retardants, for example, that you find in your upholsteries, in your electronic equipments, and many other consumer products. So this is a big issue now, and there's a big move to try to ban them globally, because there are alternatives. So anyway, let me proceed. I just to mention that if you notice the picture there is a picture of a child, because the children are the most affected, they're the most vulnerable, and this is the one that worries me a lot, because I have 2 grandsons, or 3 grandsons now, and I always think about their future, and I think if the present generation will not do something really revolutionary, the future of our children will be very bleak, I think. Next slide, please. And in 1998, we have very few data to come by, but in 1998, some scientist by the name of J. Ratnam made an estimate that about 25 million agricultural workers suffer an incident of pesticide poisoning each year, and he's talking only about the acute effects. It did not include the chronic effects. And in fact, a study in Costa Rica showed that for every one poisoning case that is reported, there are 20 more that are not reported. So if you look at from that angle, in fact, billions of people are actually being poisoned by pesticides without us actually knowing it or realizing it. So this is really a devastating effect on our health and our environment. Next, please. And so what are the effects of the toxic chemicals on health? Very often we tend to limit the adverse effects on the acute effects we observe, basically neurologic effects, or probably asthmatic exacerbation of asthma, or perhaps once in a while we suspect cancer. But actually, you think of a disease, these toxic chemicals, these pesticides can cause this disease: cancer, immune system dysfunction, neurobehavioral impairment, especially in children, and that includes developmental disorders like autism, blood diseases, liver organ dysfunctions, endocrine disrupting effects, which was not realized until only probably 15 years ago, especially the low levels of exposure to these chemicals, which they thought was safe, which is in fact not true. Even the lowest level of these pesticides can actually cause cancer and endocrine system dysfunction or even immune system dysfunction, and then disorders of metabolism, including diabetes, thyroid, etc. And I'd like to discuss more about the so-called maximum allowable limits that regulatory agencies set, and below that they say it is safe. It is not actually true. If you look into the history of how these limits are developed, it's actually based on toxicologic studies that are very crude, because I do that myself in my laboratory. We take a group of mice or rats, and then probably 3 or 4 levels of dose of a certain toxic chemical, and then expose these mice and rats to these chemicals, and we come up with the curve, of course comparing it to the control. And then we come up what we call a no effect level. And then we come up with that figure, no effect level, then we conclude that below that, it doesn't cause anything, which actually is a very inaccurate way of assessing the toxicity of the chemical. One, because the parameter that we're observing is very simple and very inadequate, like mortality. We measure the death of the animal. Or perhaps sometimes, occasionally, you measure the effect on the liver or kidney on special studies. But most of the time, it is the mortality. And therefore, it doesn't speak about endocrine system dysfunction. It doesn't talk about immune system dysfunction. It doesn't talk of the other chronic diseases that might happen. And yet, this is being used by all governments practically to say that when you find, for example, this level of let's say, chlorpyrifos in your food, and it's below the maximum allowable level, it is safe. No, that is not correct. Because especially right now, even very low levels, when you talk about cancer, when you talk about endocrine system dysfunction, when you talk about damage to the immune system, when you talk about neurobehavioral impairment, there's really no low dose that you could say it is safe. Even the lowest dose can produce those effects. The only difference is that with the low dose, you have less probability of the incidence of that disease. For example, if you are above the maximum allowable limit, let's say 10 milligrams per kilogram or 10 milligrams or per liter if it is water, then you calculate through some laboratory or probably epidemiologic studies, you calculate that the incidence of cancer will be something like 1 in 5,000 people who are exposed. And then when you are below the so-called maximum allowable limit, let's say 1 milligram per liter, then your incidence becomes lower. Perhaps your incidence of disease is 1 in 10,000 people exposed. But still, the risk of having the cancer is there, or the risk of having endocrine disruption is there. It doesn't disappear. And for those who understand the mathematics of it, in fact, when you measure the levels of concentration or the levels of or the concentration of chemicals in biological fluids, they never really become zero. Those who understand the exponential nature of these numbers, they approach zero, but they don't become zero. So that shows us that for certain indicators of diseases, there's really no safe level, and that includes cancer. But they are not telling this to the most consumers because of these official bodies which declare, oh, it is acceptable, declared by the US FDA, declared by the US EPA, that it is safe. But it's not. So I think that is very important. Now I'd like to go now, I hope I can spend at least 5 minutes to discuss this, because I think the reason why I'm really concerned about the genetically engineered crops is because when you study how they make it, you can easily understand why it is hazardous to health. For example, for BT corn, they can now isolate the gene that produces a pesticide in a soil microbe called Bacillus thuringiensis. That's why it's called BT, which is illustrated here. They get the gene that produces the pesticide. They make a gene construct, because the gene by itself cannot go into the genome of the corn by itself. So they use a virus vector. They inactivate a highly infective virus called retrovirus, similar to the Hanta, Ebola, HIV virus as a vehicle. And they splice it there, and they use also promoter gene. They use also a portion of the virus from the plant called cauliflower mosaic virus, which is also a highly infective virus element. And then they put also the antibiotic resistance gene, which is a marker, because not all the cells of the corn will accept this gene construct. In fact, they bombard the genome so that the cells will be forced to accept it, but not all will accept. So the way they isolate the cells that accepted the gene construct is through the antibiotic marker. So they put antibiotics into these growing cells, and all those cells that did not accept the gene construct will die because of the effect of the antibiotic. So those cells who survive will become the GE corn. So every cell of that corn will have that gene construct, not only the BT gene. So this corn now will express the toxic protein produced by the BT gene that will kill the corn borer that attacks the corn. That's why it becomes pest resistant as far as the corn borer is concerned. So that's why they claim that now there's less pesticide necessary to combat the insect, which is actually misleading because they are not considering the BT toxin from the bacterium as a pesticide. By definition, it is a pesticide, but they are not defining it as a pesticide. That's why they claim there's less pesticide. In fact, there's more pesticide because now every cell of the corn has a pesticide. Unlike when you spray a pesticide, for example, from the outside, you can actually, some of this pesticide wash off. It doesn't penetrate all of the parts of the corn. Now you have a pesticide all over, and they call there's less pesticide. See that kind of logic? And I was actually talking about the antibiotic resistance gene. So now there is this antibiotic resistance gene in every cell. So when the pollen is adhered to the bee, for example, and goes to the other parts of the environment, or perhaps blown by the wind, or when this corn will dry, it's carried with the dust, and all these gene fragments will be in the dust, will be in the air. It will, and you probably inhale it. And if you eat the corn, you probably eat that gene construct. Well, of course, they say no, it will not go into your intestinal bacteria because it will be destroyed by the stomach acid. That is the claim. That has been completely debunked. Gene fragments can survive the stomach acid. And in fact, it has been shown by newer scientific studies by independent scientists that it can actually be found in the blood of the mother. It can be found in the fetus. So it can go everywhere. And then it can be incorporated by your intestinal bacteria. It can be incorporated by other bacteria, this antibiotic resistance gene. So what does it mean? So now if you come down with E. coli septicemia, for example, and this E. coli comes from the intestine, and that E. coli has already in it the antibiotic resistance gene, you go to the hospital, the treatment is giving you antibiotics. That antibiotics will no longer be effective on you. And this is a disastrous situation because a lot of life-threatening infections are happening, and we don't know which bacteria will actually be incorporating this antibiotic resistance gene. That is why even the British Medical Society has issued a resolution early 2000, urging the governments to make sure that these companies will not use antibiotic resistance gene as a marker, because there are actually alternatives. They don't have to use this antibiotic resistance gene, but perhaps this is the cheapest. Until now, they're using this antibiotic resistance gene. And I understand, based on my readings, they're also using antibiotic resistance gene in coming up with GE papaya. They're using the kanamycin resistance gene. And then some scientists I have debated with, they say, oh, but it is kanamycin. You no longer use kanamycin in the hospitals to treat patients. You use tobramycin. You use this other antibiotics. Yes, but they belong to the same aminoglycoside class. And if you are not absent in your pharmacology class, which I teach actually, you will understand that there is such a thing as cross-resistance. If the microbe become resistant to kanamycin, they become also resistant, most likely, to the newer aminoglycosides. Well, they're not even medical doctors in the first place, and they're saying that these GE crops are safe. you will notice most of the scientists who say that these GE crops are safe are agricultural scientists. Except in the Philippines, I found only one medical doctor who says that these GE crops are safe. In most others, practically all are agricultural scientists. So I say, why? I mean, if you want to find out whether a building is safe or not, would you ask the gardener? Isn't it you should ask the structural engineer? Now, you want to find out whether this GE crops or this pesticide is safe in human beings, you ask the agriculturist. And the agriculturist also declared that it is safe. I mean, I find this dishonest also on the part of the agricultural scientist because it is completely outside his competence to do that. And we have actually a subspecialty in medicines who actually study this aspect, the effect of potential toxins in the human body, and that is the medical toxicologist. In the Philippines, we are probably about 10 medical toxicologists in the Philippines. So if they don't want me, they could probably ask the others. At least, and I asked the other medical toxicologists, has anybody from the government or anybody asked you about your opinion about the dangers or safety of genetically modified crops? And they tell me, none. They were not consulted. So why does the government believe the agricultural scientists when they say that this is safe for human health? Isn't that stupidity? Well, of course, there's something else behind that. It's not really stupidity. It's all about money. Okay. So these are the dangers. Allergy. I've seen patients who became allergic to BT corn in the communities where they forced the farmers to plant BT corn. And we actually sent samples to our friend in Norway, Dr. Travik, if you have read the name, and he actually analyzed the bloods, and he found specific antibodies to BT toxin. And that's why we are sure that the allergic reactions that I found in that community was due to the BT corn, the GE corn. Unfortunately, Dr. Travik was so excited about the results of his study, he put out the partial results because it was not yet completed. He should have done some more peripheral studies to complete the study in a scientific conference in Singapore. And he was ganged up by most scientists there, and of course by the corporations, saying that why did he put out the results without the results being complete? And the reason of Dr. Travik, this is a very important information. People should know that there are specific antibodies so that they will avoid this BT corn. So he thought it was a moral obligation to do that. So I supported him. But of course, the other side is more powerful. Eventually, he lost his funding. They vilified him and all sorts of things that you know happens to scientists, so counteract the corporate agenda. And I hope Dr. Pang is not yet under that kind of pressure. Not yet. And, these things happen. And actually, if you look into the mechanism, it's very easy to understand why the increase of allergic reactions is definitely there. And in England, of course, it's not a cause and effect relationship. It so happened when GE soy increased in consumption in consumers in England, they also saw a corresponding increase of allergic reactions to soy in England. In the US, you probably know that the US has the highest incidence of food allergy in the whole world. And it's probably, I don't know, maybe it is or it is not related, but I think it is related to the fact that the US is consuming the most genetically engineered foods. Most of your corn are genetically engineered. Most of your soy is genetically engineered. And now you have genetically engineered papaya. You probably will come up with a genetically engineered human being, which is not far-fetched. I think they're now starting, Dr. Pang, to experiment also human being. Anyway, so this, I cannot discuss all these potential health effects because he was signaling me already. So I just go to the precautionary principle. Nevertheless, if people believe there's not enough scientific evidence then we can use the precautionary principle. When there are reasonable grounds to indicate potential harm to health and environment, precautionary actions should be taken, even if cause and effect relationship has not been established scientifically. And in fact, in the US, you have statutes that would support the precautionary principle, although it's not in your laws, it's not in your constitution, but the law that protects the Great Lakes actually contains the statement on precautionary principle. But the US government does not recognize the application of precautionary principle. In fact, they opposed vehemently in the Stockholm Convention when we inserted the term precautionary principle. Nevertheless, I think there are a lot of good lawyers, and they can make some arguments in favor of protecting the health of the people. Unfortunately, also the US Constitution, among the few countries in the world, do not recognize the right to a healthful environment. Our country recognizes that, as well as 95 other countries, but the US, I think Japan, Australia, mostly developed countries, do not recognize the right to a healthful environment. Next. Well, saying that, because we work in poor communities, I always include the fact that we can mitigate at least the effect of these toxic chemicals, particularly pesticides, or even microbes, or even heavy metals, because activated charcoal is a good adsorbent. So you can use that to reduce. If you think you have ingested these poisons, you can use that, or maybe you can filter your water with activated charcoal. But you have the commercial filters, which are quite effective, although expensive. But in the communities, it's useful to know how to make activated charcoal. And we teach them to do that in the communities. Or the plant Moringa oleifera. Among the Filipinos, this is well known. The dried mature seeds, if you pulverize it, it can clean water. It can actually take out the pesticides, it can take out heavy metals, it can take out amoeba and the other bacteria, it can take out also other toxic elements there in the water. It's available in Hawaii. I've seen it along the road, this plant, there's plenty. And there's a simple way to do that. Two mature seeds of this plant can actually clean 1 liter of water. So that's not much. I mean, you can actually, it's being done in many communities already in Africa. Some communities in Asia are doing that also. And it's also important to start early. This is my grandson, 5 years old. I've taught him already about the dangers of pesticides. I taught him about organic vegetables when he was still 2.5 years old. And I've even taught him the scientific names of the organic vegetables, and he can recite 20 scientific names of the vegetables he is eating. And it's really encouraging, because now he's an avid advocate for sustainable agriculture, for organic food. And when his dad first offered him an apple when he was 3 years old, his first question is that organic? So the dad is forced to find organic food for him. And now the family, including my daughter, is now regularly buying organic vegetables in their meals. So it's encouraging. And he has been interviewed already by the television station in our country, in Manila, because of his statements about, like this one, I love organic food, no to pesticides, pesticides harm your health. And he delivered his line quite beautifully, I think. He even had more time than me in the interview. So we can do that. The children are very effective agents of change. And I think, and since it is their future that is at stake, by the way, so it is their right to know the dangers of pesticides and genetically engineered food. So I hope we involve the children in this campaign. Thank you very much for your patience.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today on the Shaka Movement's Malama Aina show, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Megan. Please go to the shakamovement.org website. Please go to our crowdfunding campaign. We can't do this without you. I mean, this is total grassroots, man. We just, we're just working this stuff up because we care. And we have the technical abilities. The internet gives us the ability to do research and to be able to pull information that's independent of corporate control, and that is our commitment to this community. And we need some funding for lots of things. We want to have more public forums. We want to bring more experts in, like Dr. Quijano. We've had Tyrone Hayes was here, Jeffrey Smith was here. We've had other doctors as well. Dr. Hubert was here. All of their talks and stuff stuff are on the shakamovement.org website. There's a tremendous amount of educational material there. Please take a look at that stuff and learn for yourselves what the real issues. If you see here in the public medium that the newspapers are talking about stuff that just seems kind of trivial, that they're nitpicking on things that aren't really very important, well, they're doing that for a reason. They're doing that to obscure what's really going on. So we urge you, please do some research, listen, and look to make an intelligent vote when the time comes. Thank you all, and watch for us next week. Thanks, Megan. See you all.
Aloha. Shaka.